Good morning. Here this morning I'm standing with an old spring house. They used to build these rock structures or wooden. There are many different kinds, but most often you see them surrounded with rock, and they would protect the spring sources for their drinking water, for their livestock. And I'm reminded today of another story about water. Not just any water, not rainwater, not water stagnating in a puddle, but living water. The 4th chapter of John, we see the narrative of Jesus and his interaction with the Samaritan woman at the well. This story is probably familiar to most of you, but as the story starts out, I believe it says in the King James, Jesus needs to go through Samaria. Depending on your translation, it would say he had to go through Samaria or he needed to. Certainly there was the geographical necessity of that. But also I would at least very briefly touch on the point that Jesus had a divine appointment, a time scheduled to meet with this woman. This is a great story as we get into it. As a matter of fact, I think we're just going to do it in 2 parts. The setup today and then the conclusion the next time we meet. But we see Jesus traveling, and I have to give you a little bit of history here between the Jews and the Samaritans. Quite frankly, they didn't like each other. I guess today we would think along the terms of racism, cultural hate. Certainly, we are past way beyond any of that today, right? Sadly, that's probably not the case. But a good Jew would avoid Samaria, the territory, as well as any interaction they could with the Samaritans. Their history goes way back. I don't have time here to go into the details, but they started to worship slightly different. The Samaritans were accused of bringing in pagan gods and adulterating the Jewish religion, the worship of Yahweh. And just to illustrate in this statement the hatred, the animosity between them, the Jews would say that a woman during her monthly period, her menstrual cycle, would be unclean for a period of time. In relation to the Samaritans, they would say that a Samaritan girl was unclean from the day she was born. They hated each other. And here we see Jesus traveling, and he's not on a bus, he's not on a train, he's not on an airplane. He's walking. The distance, if you look, probably took him at least 2 days' travel, and it says he was traveling with his disciples through the desert, and he was hot. And he was tired. And so the disciples went to town for provisions, and Jesus went to a well in Sychar, the city of the Samaritans. And it was midday, if you look at the time. The author is very specific of the time, and generally at that point in the day the sun is high and it's hot. That's not the time you go to draw water. The clay pots that the women often would take would weigh upwards of 40 to 50 pounds each. Add 8 pounds a gallon of water to that, and that's a significant load. They would go in the cool of the morning, but we see this woman here at the well, this Samaritan woman, alone. That in itself begs questions in my mind. Why was she there alone? Could she not go with other women? I think as the story progresses, we see that in all likelihood she was a social outcast. For what reasons, we don't know, but I think there is an implication that her promiscuity or her life circumstances have forced her to align herself with an unsavory crowd. And yet we see Jesus, and he says, "Woman, can you draw me a drink?" What is her response? She is surprised. Why? First, he's a Jewish rabbi. She's a Samaritan. We hate each other, don't you remember? What are you doing talking to me? Second, she's a woman. He's a male. Culturally, that gender difference, there was not that one-on-one teaching. There were a lot of distancing measures there. But Jesus was tired, Scripture tells us. And he wanted a drink, and he asked the woman for a drink. And in my mind, this is where the story really takes off. This is a great story, and I hope you join me next time as we look at some of the greater details in here and what that means for us today. Thank you.